Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. Today's episode is a folktale from Bengal. It's about a boy with the moon on his forehead and his sister. The moon on his forehead is pretty much like a built in headlamp. It's a longish story, so we'll need more than one episode to cover this. Our story begins with a king. Let's call him Bhola, which is the Hindi word for gullible. The reason for that will soon be clear. King Bhola had only one worry, and it did not have anything to do with the pressures of running his kingdom. Well, in a way it did. The king and his queen didn't have any children. Bhola needed an heir whom he could train up and pass the administrative worries to, so that he could retire to the quiet life. After he had had no luck for a while, he married again, much to the disapproval of his queen, his first wife. And when the second marriage didn't help either, he married again. He did this a few more times, until he was left with 6 wives and still no children. In trying to remedy the situation, he had made it worse. Domestic decisions were a lot harder to navigate, with constant power struggles between the 6 queens. For that reason, he preferred to be out hunting most of the time. The kingdom was effectively being neglected. During one such hunt, the king approached a river for a much-needed drink of water. But then, he heard voices. There were girls bathing in the river. Bhola was the king, but he was definitely not a gentleman. He didn't quickly leave the scene and go upstream to quench his thirst. In fact, his thirst for water had turned into thirst for something else. He hid behind a rock and listened to what the girls were saying. As it happens, they represented a cross-section of the social and economic classes in his kingdom. And as you can guess, there were only 2 economic classes, the rich and the poor. But there were 4 social classes, the warriors, the merchants, the priesthood, and the workers. One of the girls was the daughter of the king's minister. The other was the daughter of a merchant. The third one was a daughter of the royal priest. And the fourth was the daughter of an elderly widow who gathered cow dung fresh from the source and then sold it. There are no prizes for guessing which was the least glamorous profession. Nevertheless, the 4 girls from widely different financial situations were together. And that showed that despite having a king who was neglecting his duties, some things were going well in the kingdom. I cannot say the same about respect for privacy though. The king listened to all the boring stuff that first allowed him to distinguish between the voices. And then, the conversation took an interesting turn. The 4 girls began talking about why they would make the ideal wife. The minister's daughter laid claim to that because her husband would never have to buy clothes for her. She had some magical ability because the clothes she wore would never soil. They would never lose their shine. Wear and tear wasn't a thing with her. "Do you actually want that?" asked one girl, surprised. "Where is the joy in not trying out new clothes?" asked another. "Ew," remarked the fourth girl. "Even if they don't tear, the clothes must get smelly after a while." "I have something better," said the merchant's daughter. "The gas I use for cooking will never run out. My husband will have an incredibly low utility bill." "But you still have to do all the cooking," said the daughter of the priest. "When I cook, the pot never runs out of food, no matter how many times I serve out of it. I've often used this trick at parties and at the temple. People are always amazed how I manage to cook for so many people. The reality is that I've only ever cooked once in my life, and every day since, we've been eating out of the same pot." "And you're eating the same food every single day?" asked the fourth girl. "You know, we don't earn much as cow dung collectors, but my mom and I do vary our food. Once a month, we even get to add salt to our rice." She paused and added, "But seeing as you've all been loudly proclaiming your unique selling point to an imaginary eavesdropping bachelor, I suppose I must do that too. Okay, my fortune is that I'm destined to give birth to a boy and a girl. The boy will have a moon on his forehead and stars on his hands." "Stars? Are those like chickenpox or measles rashes?" asked one girl. "Why would you want a child like that?" Another said, "The moon on his forehead, huh? Is that a birthmark the shape of a crescent?" This was a more sensible girl. The third asked, "What about the girl? What does she have?" "Beauty, both internal and external," replied the cow dung collector's daughter. The king had heard enough. He knew which one he wanted to marry. He jumped out from behind the rock and declared, "I know which one of you I'm going to marry." "Eek!" screamed the girls and threw rocks at him. After much confusion and finally some intervention from the more mature behaving minister, priest, merchant, and cow dung collector, there was a shaky acceptance from the girls that there was a 1 in 4 chance that they would have to marry this madman. Bhola announced that the cow dung collector's daughter was the girl for him. The other three breathed a huge sigh of relief. And truth be told, the cow dung collector's daughter, whom we shall call Gauri, was not unhappy with the decision. Collecting cow dung was not the worst profession, but it was pretty far down in the list of things that will make your resume look good. It was almost as bad as scaring away crows and dogs in the marketplace. Maybe Gauri would even have the resources to hire people to collect cow dung for her, if she wanted to. All she would have to tolerate would be a husband who might suddenly jump out from behind the curtains and shout, "Peekaboo," at the children after they were born. Maybe the kids would not get too frightened. Despite this whole marry a new girl thing not having worked 6 times, Bhola for some reason was optimistic this time. I mean, 7th time's the charm, right? Bhola and Gauri had a grand wedding. Not to call the king too gullible, but maybe he should not have also combined in a gender reveal party. He had put up all those moon and star decorations and announced naming contests for his son and daughter, who he was sure were going to be born. Just because that's what Gauri found in a fortune cookie. But, as luck would have it, in a few months, Gauri did share with Bhola that she was in fact expecting. The king was delighted, but not surprised. The 6 other queens, who previously were in all kinds of disputes with each other, were now united in their hatred of Gauri, and united in their remembrance of times when each of them was the most important queen in the palace. Sure, they were still queens who got to have lots of servants and all their wishes fulfilled, but each had lost something they valued a lot more: the king's attention. They were constantly on the lookout for ways they could pay her back for the harm the king had caused them. Soon, the opportunity presented itself. The king had a campaign to launch. He knew he would have to be away for months, but he did not want to miss his children being born. So he did something innovative. He gave Gauri a magic bell and told her to ring it only when she was going into labor. He would return immediately, no matter where he was. But she must be careful not to ring it when she didn't need him. Gauri marveled at the beautiful bell and thanked him for it. The king departed, and not long after, the other 6 queens ventured into her chambers, and they made polite conversation. They did ask her what the king had given her. Gauri promptly described the mobile phone / pager / summoning charm she had been given. Queen number 4 said, "Ha! That Bhola, always the practical joker." "I'm sorry, what?" asked Gauri. "Yeah," chimed in Queen number 2. "He's played that trick on me before. Told me exactly that before going into battle. And when I rang the bell, he jumped out from behind the curtain and had a good laugh at my expense." "Me too," added a couple more queens. Obviously, Bhola had done no such thing. The queens were trying to get Gauri into trouble. But to Gauri, what the queens described simply reinforced a pattern she had expected from her first encounter with the king. She kept thinking about this after the queens left. Half-heartedly, she rang the bell and was shocked to have the king shoot into her chambers instantly. She started to say, but couldn't find the words. "You are not in labor," observed the king. "Did I not specifically warn you to not call me? I was in the middle of a deuce difficult negotiation, and I just found the upper hand. I had to abandon all that and rush back here. This little maneuver is going to cost the kingdom 30 years of economic growth." After he had calmed down, Bhola left again, with a strict warning not to ring the bell unless she was in labor. That was a mistake. He should have given the bell to her doctor instead. Gauri's doctor was employed by the king, and she could be trusted to follow the orders of someone who was paying her salary. After a while, the queens again had a conversation with Gauri. Ringing the bell the first time had worked, sure, but it must have been because the king was nearby at the time. I'm sure he's hundreds of miles away by now. There's no way it will work, they told her. Gauri was tempted to try it a second time. But the king, who was indeed hundreds of miles away, did show up instantly. Again, he was angry. This time for having had to duck out of the King of the Year awards. Kind of like the Oscars or Academy Awards for royalty. He was a strong contender, but now he did not even know who won. It was even possible that Bhola had won, but they had decided to present the award to the second best king, just because Bhola was absent. Instead of giving the bell to Gauri's doctor at this point, he instead just left, promising to not return even if she rang it. Gauri did ring it frantically because soon after, she went into labor. But the king did not return. He thought she was crying wolf again. When he did return weeks later, the king was surprised to see his adorable little twins. Wait a minute, he thought. The boy had no moon on his forehead, and the girl was beautiful and all, but she kept biting him. In fact, now that he looked closely, they were covered in fur all over. They had a large wet nose and were wagging their tails. Dogs, he screamed. My children are little fox terriers. They are adorable little fox terriers. But they can't rule the kingdom. He summoned Gauri and without much of a trial, banished her from the palace and punished her. Gauri was going to be the bottom rung of society. She would be dressed in rags, and her job was to scare crows and dogs from the marketplace. Gauri tried to speak, to explain, but Bhola wouldn't listen. Even if he had heard, it would not have helped anyway, because Gauri wasn't much of an eyewitness to what had happened. She had passed out, and when she woke up, the adorable little puppies were right next to her. The reality was that the other 6 queens had arranged this. They had engaged the midwife in their conspiracy. She took the 2 actual human babies that were born and replaced them with the puppies. The babies were indeed a boy and a girl. And the boy definitely had a moon on his forehead and stars on his hands. In the middle of the night, the midwife carried the boy and the girl to deal with them. While it was a dark night, the boy's forehead and hands shone, providing a natural flashlight for her to use. This could come in handy, she thought. But it's not worth keeping him alive just for this. I'll have to do what the queens commanded. She took the children to the potter's house. And not as a rescue mission. She knew the habits of the potter and her husband. Usually, they left all the raw clay pots in the oven at night and fired up the oven in the morning. The midwife carefully placed the babies inside the pots in the oven and quickly exited the scene. The potter wouldn't even realize until it was too late. The midwife walked home, rubbing her hands in glee, but stumbling through the dark, as she no longer had her human flashlight. She looked forward to collecting her reward from the queens the next day. The prophecy about Gauri had been true enough. But here it ended. The king would never even know that he had had children. We'll leave it here for now. But seeing as this is a folktale, this isn't much of a cliffhanger to leave it on. You get no prizes for guessing whether the babies survived. In the next episode, we'll continue this story. We'll find out how to get by on charm alone. And we'll see why, if a stranger wants to send you on a crazy quest to find something obscure that no one else heard of, and for a reason that no one seems to understand, it might be a good idea to refuse. That's it for now. I can't believe it's already been a whole year since I started this podcast. Thank you for your support and your feedback. It means a lot to me. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving me a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. And again, thanks to all of you listeners for your support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.